The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the hosts and guests, and not necessarily those of the staff or management of Worldwide Digital Broadcasting Corporation.
Hello, I am Dr. Andrea Goeglein. I am both a success catalyst and an applied positive psychologist, and I welcome you today to this segment of Serving Your Success. With me,
Hi, I'm Sharon Natashek. I'm a former producer of America's Most Wanted and an entrepreneur here in Las Vegas.
and our treasured guest today, because Sharon and I do this show so often together, is someone who came into my life because he was having dinner with friends of mine, and he was discussing his next career challenges. I'd like to introduce you to Colonel Steve Soroka. Welcome.
Welcome. He's also a friend. Our daughters go to school together.
We found that
Used to
out.
go to school together. Yep. And so I want to ask you today, as our guest, how would you define success?
Oh, wow. Great question. First of all, I want to say thanks for having me with you today.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's been a long road between when we first met and now through my transition
in Honey
out of the
Salt, a
military.
wonderful restaurant in Las Vegas. If you ever get there, it's kind of like one of our little haunts.
And it's been great working with you and Joey and our daughter Maya with Sydney. It's been a great road there also. What a great friendship we have here, so hopefully we won't spoil
That's
it
right.
next.
Nope, we will.
So
Success.
How would you describe it?
Success is really interesting because I spent a lifetime of service so far.
Correct.
And it was not financial. It had nothing to do with the money. In fact, that's what we would talk about. Our pride and the reason we continued to do what we're doing was because we felt good inside about what we were doing.
And just so our listeners know, you're a retired colonel of which
Branch.
Branch. That's
Great.
the word I was trying to think of. Branch.
I had the honor of serving 30 years in the United States Air Force.
Fabulous.
And I got to fly the world's greatest aircraft, the F-15 Eagle, the foremost air superiority fighter until recently, and we've just produced the F-22 fighter, and I applaud our warriors that get to fly that aircraft. And through the time, I got to command troops. I got to be part of employing people in combat, sending people to combat, and developing strategy for combat. So when you talk about success, wow, that's but when you set an objective and you achieve it, that's success.
Right.
But I think in personal success is what you measure your values inside. And when you can meet your values inside, then you can sleep well at night and you feel proud of your accomplishments to that
Okay,
point.
that's very much along the lines of what we would teach in business.
Right.
When you're trying to, pick a career, that's what you want. Know what your values are, make sure that you're aligned with that. 30 years, you're obviously really young, so you went in to the service very young.
Well, I appreciate that comment.
No, it's true, relative to me, you're very young. And it's the joke, boy, they're all looking younger these days.
That's true.
Yes,
They're
they
all
are.
kids.
They're all kids. But really, you put in 30 years of service, and yet you were in your early 50s.
Right.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit first.
Yes.
Success. So how old were you when you went into the service?
Well, I entered the academy at 17. I graduated and became an officer at 22.
17.
At 22 years old.
Okay, so can you remember what success was to the 17-year-old Steve?
Wow. I set out to achieve and be part of an organization that would pose the greatest challenge to me.
Wow.
And I knew I was taking a risk, but I said, let's do it. And,
Okay.
and I asked other people's opinions about what they knew of me and what
Right.
it would take to do that. And they said, we encourage you to do that.
So you come out of the academy, you now start, and my understanding of the military is that success is about the only thing you're supposed to aim towards. They're actually, unlike corporations who will say, we want you to make as many mistakes as possible because the more mistakes you make, the more innovative you can be. I don't think that's the same in the military. You were taught a little differently. So explain how that grew up in you.
I would say it's not too far different. However, when you first enter the military as an officer, as I did, you are a second lieutenant.
Okay.
And they say when you are a second lieutenant, that's your opportunity to make mistakes. And then
That's
at
okay.
about 2 years later, you make first lieutenant, and then you better make fewer mistakes. And then about the time you make
okay.
captain, you better be pretty much mistake-free.
Okay.
But, we all make mistakes along the way.
Correct.
And there's some mistakes that are crimes and
Right.
some that are mistakes. And
Right.
our bosses all made the distinction. Is if you commit a crime, we have a problem.
Right.
If you make a mistake, we're going to work with you, correct it, improve it, and give you the opportunity to grow from it. But if it's a crime, you're done.
I'm broadly thinking across my experience working with people within corporations or their own businesses, and I would say the same criteria. Basically, there is that gray area. When I think of business people starting out in their garages type of situations, not everybody's getting their business license right away. Not everybody's paying those taxes right away. Come on, that's just a bunch of crap, and nor should you. It's that start out period. And then as you begin to know that you're in the right place and you're learning the right things, you kind of join the system a little bit more and more.
Yes.
And that sounds like the same type of system.
Well, let me give you an example of how you're taught to not make a mistake.
Okay.
Early on, when you're flying, you're a team. And even though you're a second lieutenant or a first lieutenant, you could have the opportunity to lead the entire mission. That's a big responsibility. And if you make a mistake, or your plan's not right, or you didn't make the right decision going Mach 1 one direction where people are closing at a rate of 1 mile every 3 seconds, and somebody on your side didn't come home, they would say, and Steve, you get to write the letter to his wife.
Wow.
Oh.
Because
how do you
when
handle that responsibility?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you? I know you've been in that position before, but what does leadership mean to you? Because that is the ultimate leadership in having to write a letter home.
Yeah, when leadership is all about your people.
Right.
It's about achieving a goal, but the way you achieve your goal is through your people. I hear, after having stepped out of the military, that leadership is more about making the dollar. Well, really, you won't make a dollar if the people that you're leading don't do everything they can to support you. So leadership is all about removing the obstacles for your people, creating the environment where they can thrive. And I say, ultimately, that means is if you create a workplace where people love coming to work every day, you win.
Right.
You've won.
There you go. It's so interesting because historically, in management theory, leadership theory, and we spoke about this with our guest last week, Anthony Gatling, the leadership theories of the 30s and 40s came completely out of the military, and it was not this. It was more a command and control version of leadership. By the time I was studying it in the 80s and 90s, there was in that moment a clear shift that we needed to have people that would choose to follow us, not that were being tortured into following us or
Absolutely.
punished into following us. And I know today corporations, it is very much that mentality. And for millennials, the idea of following someone who they are not in alignment, you really have to earn their respect almost to a silly degree from my old age perspective. But it is, no, it is.
Yes, I agree.
They show up and it's like, you don't get a leeway as a leader. You make a mistake, they're pretty hard taskmasters on you. And what it sounds as though you had the privilege of being there through that same, because we're talking about the same time period, the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, where you would have been in that actual leadership transition. And so it appears you're perfectly suited to then go into civilian life and do and teach the same exact thing.
I agree, and that's great to hear that philosophy that, as you described it. I say that there was a period of time where people believed that leaders were born.
Right.
And we know today that leaders are made. Everybody may have a little more innate leadership
betcha.
skill than somebody else, but unless you practice it and hone it, you won't have that leadership that you're describing.
Right.
And when I speak about the veterans and our youth in the military, there is no crisis of youth in the military today.
Right.
There is absolutely no crisis.
That's great to hear.
And the reason is simple. They thrive and thrive on the same things. Actually, we all did. We just didn't know it.
Correct.
They want to know where the bar is.
Correct.
They want to be taught how to get there.
Correct.
They want to be held accountable. When they get there, they want to be patted on the back.
Right.
And if you do that with a millennial, you got them.
And I find, and you growing a next generation also, it is not as though they don't want to be held accountable or they don't want to do their part. What they will not tolerate is the charade, right? False leadership, false success, false, like,
I think they see through it.
they do.
They do.
And whereas we had more of a good boy, good girl mentality, and we were more willing to cut a little slack and let people get away with it, there is no slack cutting at
Well, I
this
think
point.
they challenge it and they ask
Oh,
why.
yes.
You know,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
want to
yeah.
know why. They want a reason.
Right. So here you are, you come up to that point, that 30-year point, which is quite a magical point in all the branches, isn't it, for
yes.
career
Yeah.
people?
I
And you
was
make
very blessed to have reached that milestone.
Yes.
Yes.
There's a lot of reasons to not make it, and I
Really?
was
We're
blessed
glad
to
you're
have made
here.
it.
Yes.
Yes. And then you have to think about what's next. You're at the pinnacle of 30 years. The biggest title, the fact you've made it means you've done nothing but do it basically right. And then the door opens. Anybody else feel like that out there? And then the door opens.
Yeah, the door opens, they kick you out of it, and they slam it shut behind and lock
You
it.
can't come back.
There's no coming
A
back.
little bit like your mother and father.
How did that feel? I mean, I remember I was there when
You were.
when that happened.
Yep.
You were
So-
both there as part
We
of that
were.
time for me, and I think you know it's a very frightening feeling.
Sure.
You're stepping off solid ground onto mushy ground.
Yes.
And depending on what your goals are when you leave, you could be totally content with that transition. I've retired from the military. I'm young enough that I can go enjoy things. I'm old enough that I've accomplished so much and I can feel satisfied with that. But if you have that fire still burning, which most do,
Right.
most of our warriors, when they leave the service, they are ready to take that talent and skill and bring it to the community. And then you go into the community and you go, oh, hi. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So what about you? And you know, one of the things I'd like to pause in Steve's story that I believe applies to all of us. The same feelings happen whether or not you make a decision to step back from your corporate career, as one of our guests did, and raise your children, and then you think about going back in. Whether or not you've had a phenomenal corporate career, and then all of a sudden economics or just the next boss wasn't a great one, and you're not there anymore, but yet you know that you have done so much, and then, you know, I'm not going to talk about that door closing. What I am going to say is the door has opened. And it happens to us at many times in life.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of our birthdays.
Yes.
And, you know, doors are opening. So the door has opened for you. And you started, what were the surprises? And start with the surprises that you wish you hadn't been surprised. You know, those things, you know, experiences what you get when you don't get what you want. Tell us about those.
Okay, well, before I get there, just want to
Okay.
share that inside the military, you are constantly transitioning.
Right.
You are changing jobs. I say I changed job probably 60 to 70 times
Oh.
Whoa.
in 30 years. And sometimes you have a job, but then you have another role and another role and another role on top of that.
Right.
And especially as a young officer, you'll have a job or role for 6 months to a year, and then you completely change. But one of the most surprising things to me was when I was number 2 in command. And then I moved up to number 1 within the same organization. You would think that would be an easy transition. But it was a completely different view with a whole nother level of responsibility that I now shouldered, and that was a huge transition. So when I came out of the military, I thought I was prepared for the transition.
Okay, that's fair.
I remember that.
Yes, I thought I understand how to transition. I know how to be onboarded someplace. I know how to onboard people to places, and I know how to do that. I'm solid in what I believe and know what I can do for a team. And when I stepped out, I realized I was stepping into the Star Wars lounge compared to where I had been. So even though the things I wish I didn't know was I didn't realize that truly, while I lived in the community, but my culture was the military. When I stepped into the non-military community, it was truly like stepping into the Star Wars bar, where there were people of all different alien cultures around me, and I didn't know how to read them, understand them, to know what was true and what was not.
Interesting.
Do you miss the order?
I don't miss the order, but what somebody asked me about 6 months out, and I had been employed, and it was actually my boss at the time, and said, what are you finding the greatest differences to be?
Right.
So it's not the lack of order, but I said, I think this is how I would describe it. People don't say what they mean like I'm used to.
Right.
They also don't mean what they say like I'm used to. And so my challenge now has become, how do I continue forward with this new squishy foundation that I have while keeping my integrity? So it was a challenge.
Do you see it as more of inner office politics?
I don't think it's all inner office politics. I think there is an element of that, but I think no matter where I would go or somebody transitioning,
Humans will have human conflict.
Yeah, but that's a really good question. There is politics that's different in every place, I'm sure.
Right.
But it was truly a alien environment, and I've learned that the military culture is essentially, I've stepped into, I'm now a minority. I'm a gray-haired white male that's a minority in this nation. Did you know only 2% of Americans in the past generation have worn the uniform?
Oh.
And only 1% since 9/11.
No.
So I'm part of a 2% minority of this entire generation.
Okay.
And then, but think about that, you go, well, that's just those military people. Well, coming out of World War II,
Right.
12% of Americans had worn the nation's uniform.
Wow.
Not to count the tens of thousands that had supported the war effort.
Correct.
And then when I look further, the part of what makes my transition, or a military person's transition, even more challenging is, in the last 25 years of continuous combat operations,
Right.
the aviation forces have been in continuous combat since Desert Storm for 25 years. Yet, most Americans could live their lives without even knowing there was a conflict going on.
Correct.
Absolutely.
I know that is definitely that is definitely my life. I know that 35 years ago, when I moved from New York City to Memphis, Tennessee, and I was taking classes, it was the very first time, other than my brother having been in Vietnam, and when I was a child, and he didn't choose. We did everything in our power to make sure he didn't end up going in, and he went in. And my dad, of course, being a World War II veteran, I had never met a person who chose to go into the military. I had a cousin who went to a military school, and then, he eased into it. I had another one who, he wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do, but it was never because he thought it was a career. I had one uncle who had stayed in after, who was a person who stayed in for 30 years when he originally did his service, but it was never a conversation that this is a career. Mm-hmm. It was something you did to straighten up. I knew a lot of that conversation. Yes. If you had a kid that needed to get straightened up or they were confused, the military would get them there really quick. I just didn't know that as a career path.
Right.
And I had known, and all of those people I spoke to were men. When I moved to Memphis, I actually sat next to a 19-year-old girl who said to me she was going to be going into the military, and I was 23, and I didn't even know what to say. I had never met a female who would have that as an aspiration.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I am equally shocked that I am unaware that what you said you are 2%
since Desert Storm. 2% since Desert Storm. So the chances of a military person speaking to somebody in the business community that served, well, you think of that age group, 25 years, so somebody that was, they're running the companies now.
That's right.
So the most senior people at that time are running the companies, and they don't have military experience or exposure. Wow. And all our community knows are the stereotypes that have been hyper what's
magnified.
the right word? Magnified in the media.
Right.
And so our movies are Hurt Locker, they're the American Sniper, where it shows
Right.
people having a challenge integrating back into the community.
Right.
And what about, and they seem to always portray them having some form of mental challenge with that.
You know,
Psychological
You know,
conflict.
that's really is interesting relative to positive psychology, because I know that some of the best research and a whole branch of the research in positive psychology was devoted to post-traumatic growth syndrome in an absolute effort, and this happened after the first Gulf War, to change the perspective of people coming out so that they were not locked into the trauma that you have experienced will dictate your life for the rest of your life. And when I think about it, though, in general, it is not the way it was when my father spoke of service, where there was this, if there's anyone you want to hire, it's someone with a military background.
Right.
I know that that has always been my mindset. You
Does
want
it
that
seem more like a
person.
stigma now against you?
It's a great question and a great path we're going down. I would say in most cases, yes.
Wow.
And in most cases, it's almost to your benefit to not bring up that you're military. When you're
Really?
seeking employment or you're seeking some
I have the same
some
problem with
source-
a PhD, trust me.
I'm sure. I'm sure. It's very similar
Yes.
in many ways.
Yeah.
And so it's a good question. And what I go out public speaking to try to help change the messaging around our veterans. The messaging:
Beautiful.
the veterans are broken, they're homeless,
Yes.
and here's a quote: they don't think, they only take orders. Oh my gosh!
Wow, people.
When I hear that, I almost fall out of my chair.
As you should.
And because the
Yeah.
criteria, as you said, it used to be a way you could straighten people up.
Right.
You have to take a test to get in the military.
Right.
It comes from the top 20, the folks in the military come from the top 20 to 30% of our communities. Right now, only 2 in 10 Americans aged 18 to 24 can even qualify for the military. And with waivers, you can make that 3 out of 10. So our military people are coming from the cream of the crop of our communities.
Right.
And then they're being honed razor sharp
Yes.
through the training and through the experience. And then they step into the community saying, I am the best trained employee you can possibly hire. And unfortunately, that intimidates people in some regards.
Wow.
And then some employers don't understand that this is somebody, and I say they're an active, engaged follower. Because that's the first step of leadership, is being a follower. Right?
Absolutely.
And a good follower says, I have an idea, boss.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about challenging bosses. In the military, you challenge, especially in the aviation world.
Right.
We're all, as I mentioned, that young person could be leading the formation, and I'm the colonel while the lieutenant's leading us. And if we're not doing it right, we're going to hear about it. Vice versa, if I'm leading and the lieutenant's going to die or be in trouble because I
Right.
did something wrong, I'm going to hear about it.
Sure.
Right.
So they challenge, in the military, we challenge our leaders. We challenge them to make sure that we're all going to do the thing to win and survive and thrive. And there's times, yes, I'll acknowledge, hey, if somebody says you have the wrong idea, I'll say, well, here's why I'm doing it, and they still want to challenge me. At some point, somebody has to make the decision.
You know, I want to pause you for a second, because about 3 things lit up in my brain about what you said, because I have had the opportunity to see you speak, and you are a phenomenal deliverer of message.
agree.
You have this natural, truthful way about you. You know, no one even knows you have gray hair. Your spirit is so young. And what I was struck with at this moment, though, because I do listen differently than many, is that another calling for you is being the champion of the correct message, changing the mindset.
Yes, I could see that.
I mean,
Totally.
that is such a critical shift for us all to make, where we, especially coming out of the last several months in our nation, where veterans were the pawn in the biggest game of all, on all sides, and it
Yes.
didn't look pretty.
Right.
No matter who, there's times whenever, someone comes out in a wheelchair, if there's a black person sitting there, if there's a veteran there, I'm telling you right now, I'm saying, oh my gosh, I hope they know that they're being used at some level. And your ability to shift our mindsets, one of the very first Don't Die principle is to shift your awareness, and your perspective will change. And I could really see you becoming that champion. Is that in any way part of what you're doing?
It's the part of what I'm doing.
Okay.
I feel I have two parts right here. It started out as, once I stepped into the business community, I realized that there was a lot that leadership could do for our business community.
Absolutely.
And my mantra is I'd love to be spawn a renaissance of productivity for our business community through leadership.
Absolutely.
And the leadership principles that our warriors learn in the military are those fundamentals where you inspire people to perform to a higher level. No, it's not the yelling that you saw in Gomer Pyle. It is,
Right.
It is actually inspiring, because when you inspire people to come into work, what do? They give you everything.
Right.
If you force them to work, they give you the minimum.
Right.
You want people that say, hey, boss, if we work through the weekend, we get Thanksgiving off.
Right.
Let's do it. All right, great idea. Let's go.
Right.
That's the kind of people you want. And our veterans as well. And I'll just share, I love what you're saying. Thank you.
Yeah.
The other part is, yes, changing the messaging of our veterans, because our veterans are the core of this renaissance.
Sure.
We have an opportunity to tap an untapped resource in our community that is waiting. Did you know Nevada has between 7 and 11% of our population are veterans?
Oh, so we will tend to have, that's how come those numbers seem so odd when you first said them, because I know that in our community, because we
They're
do
everywhere,
have
yeah.
Nellis Air
Nellis-
Force Base.
yeah.
We do.
And a lot of veterans do
Yes.
tend to
And we are a tax-free
retire
state,
here.
income
Yes.
tax-free state.
And we-
That's a great place.
And
in
by
that
the
regard.
way,
Yes.
and
Yes.
by the way,
But we have a great opportunity to bring them on board, and I know that many of our larger employers don't really understand the value that they're looking at.
Yeah.
And my goal is to turn around, and the title of my veterans presentation is Veterans Are Victorious. Instead of veterans are homeless, downtrodden, and need a handout.
love that.
Correct.
No,
Me too.
they're ready to take the lead, and they need to be, they want and strive to have a great, strong leader.
Okay.
And they will challenge their leaders.
Okay.
But it's only to make the organization better.
You know, it's so interesting, because when I think back on the various guests that we've had so far, there was Lacey, who had this huge corporate career, and there was something about that background that, spontaneously she was inspired to morph it. Last week with Dr. Anthony Gatlin, he was a huge corporate guy, and yet has transformed his love for corporations and his love for education. He has a doctorate now and is with the university. Now, I'm hearing you take those years of experience and reframe them in a way that you help not only others, but you help yourself move forward into the next set of decades to what you can contribute and be of service.
Now I appreciate that. I really do, because you're seeing what I've been finding that I've been naturally falling into. Now, you
Correct.
both know I've only been out of the military about 2 years.
2 years. That's
And I feel I have grown exponentially.
Right.
I'm not the same person you saw on the stage retiring or at the ceremony
No.
just 2 years ago, and I feel it. I feel
Correct.
the difference. But it's not been easy. It's been a painful road, both physically and emotionally,
Correct.
to get this growth. And now I believe I'm at the point where I can explain to the business community about our veterans.
Yeah.
And I can explain to the veterans that they really are a very talented group of people, that they don't even realize the talents they have, because the things
Right.
we're told that make us special are not the things that
is equally valued.
that's
in the
equally
outfits.
that,
Yeah.
because they're told they're great because they're a great aviation mechanic. No,
Right.
they're great because they're a supervisor, a manager. They
Correct.
show up on time. They know how to dress. They treat people appropriately, and they hold people to a standard.
Correct.
And they hold themselves to a standard.
Now, I want to share with Steve and with all of our listeners this very important part about transitions and timeframes. You're at the 2-year mark. How it generally works is that we know the first year in the psychology of shifting is the most important. Things will happen that you absolutely did not expect. You couldn't have planned for them. You really are being called at a very different level. In year 2, you begin to realize that everything you had thought prior to the transition is really in need of a reevaluation, and you start testing the boundaries. It is actually at the 36-month level, the 3rd year, where you start integrating what you thought, what you had hoped for, what you experienced into the next level. So if there's any good news, you are actually quite on track.
How does it feel?
You
That's great. Great to hear.
are on
Yeah.
track. And when I think about where we are, Are you involved in any veterans organizations right now? What is the speaking you're doing? Fill us in.
Great question and when I left the military, I had two goals. I was going to stay away from Department of Defense. I'd been there for 30 years. I wanted to try something different.
Sure.
And the other thing I was going to do was stay away from veterans organizations. Well, that lasted a short time when I realized, and I heard the messaging wrong, and I saw how, as a minority group, I was being viewed. I said, we need to change this. So I am a commissioner on the North Las Vegas Veterans Community Commission. I'm public outreach for the Nevada Veterans Council, and I just took the helm this past week for the meeting we had. I've been asked, and now I am the president of the Disabled Veterans Business Alliance, which is all about business. It's not about handouts. It's not about sweeping floors at entry-level jobs for veterans. It's about business and doing contracts for veteran businesses, and in several other veteran organizations. And I'm proud of that now. And people are seeing, hey, we do have a strong veteran community here. And we have a large number of veterans organizations, and they're run by amazing people. And if I can help them get on the map at a higher level, I'm very proud of doing so for them as well.
Beautiful. Do you have a question? Because I was about to add something else.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I have to say something that's just so funny that you probably don't know about me, and I know that you definitely don't. You know that I came out of secretarial school, to which I am always desperately proud, but I was given an opportunity to work for the corporation, W.R. Grace, that basically funded the Grace Institute, which was run by a bunch of nuns that I went to. And when I went to my interview and they were going through all of these questions, they said, did I have any preferences of what kind of department I worked in? And I said, the only thing I care about is that I only work for one boss at a time. I was not willing to be a pooled person, and that's just part of my personality. And I don't want to work for a woman. P.S. I immediately started working for a woman.
Right.
I fell in love with her. She was the neatest person, and gave me, because she was new into the corporate world, she gave me an enormous amount of responsibility, because we were both trying to figure out what is it that you have to do. So that's one of the things I would suggest that you do. Think back when you said, oh no, never. I don't ever want to do that. If you're at a point right now where you're trying to figure out, what do I want to do next? Listen to what you may have said, oh no, I don't want to do that. And ask yourself, why did I say that? I mean, I had valid reasons in my own little head at 17 years old why I said that. But are they really valid, and are you not giving yourself an opportunity?
Right.
I think your story is, and I didn't realize that you were as connected at this moment as you are with the veterans organizations. That's really incredible. So now I'll give you the...
So what advice would you give to lay people like Andrea and I, who, I mean, my father also was involved in the military. He was in Laos before we were in Laos. And my daughter and I send care packages to female soldiers overseas every month. And I try to teach her the importance of, when we see an officer or a military person in the public, to go up and thank them, shake their hand, and say thank you for your service. But, you know, in general, what can we do? I know it's always been a problem in our history of the United States that we don't recognize our soldiers or our military as much as we could. What can we do as a public?
That is a great question, and that's one of the questions that I try to address in my presentations. And I think the number one, the biggest thing that we could do right here today is just recognize that our veterans, our warriors, as I call them, because if it's soldiers, that makes you think they're Army. If you say airmen, that's Air Force. But if you say warriors, that's all of them. Recognize that our warriors are amazing first.
Yes.
And while they're going to be casual about it, and they'll be very humble about it, realize that they have a lot that they're not showing, and they don't even realize. And so when you come across a warrior that maybe you could hire, realize too that the best thing you can do for them is help them transition to the new culture.
Okay.
I would say that in the last several decades, since our all-volunteer force has come into place in the mid-'70s, that the cultures between the military and our non-military community have been slowly but surely diverging.
Okay.
So when you come out of the military, you know how to do a job, you just need to understand the new culture.
Okay.
So when you bring on a new military person, give them the opportunity for a good onboarding process. Give them that time to adjust to the culture and know what the do's and don'ts are in that culture. They'll be able to do the job. It's all the other parts that are different, that are foreign to them. And so I would encourage that. And I say it could take 6 months to a year.
Okay.
But tied in with that, I say, I've heard people say, actually it was a colonel from the Pentagon came and spoke at one of our big casinos here, and he says, you have to hire veterans because you have a moral obligation to do so, one. And two, oh, you have to pity them. Here's my buddy who got shot in the face. He's going to speak to you next. I was so irate, I had to leave the room.
I bet.
And I will share with you, if you hire a veteran because you feel obligated, they will sense it and they will leave.
Correct.
They want you to hire them because they will be your very best employee.
And you know what? Having lived through the whole EEOC and corporations, I will say that women would say the same thing. Any minority, any person with a disability. We come because we have qualifications. Please look to that. And okay, if you have to make some adjustments for some various set of other things, just do it the way you would put a person who eats with their left hand, their utensils on that side for them. Instead of making everything some sort of a category that you have boxed the person into, and that will help us get to where we want a whole lot sooner.
Oh, I love that you went there, because not only aren't veterans homogenous,
I know.
some of them, there are challenges when they went in the service, and they will have
You
challenges
betcha.
all the time. But there are people
Welcome
that
to
have done
humanity.
there are people that have done amazing things.
Yeah.
People, I was just one of many that got to manage $28 billion in contracts overseas while advising the commander of the Saudi Arabian Air Force. I was also entrusted with $28 billion to redefine our Air Force, both with new ideas, new technology, and new procedures for what we have
Did
to
you
fill
get to
gaps.
take any of that home?
I wish I did. I wish I did.
Wouldn't you like a little, just a little?
You know, you can't even, you have to be careful when you invite one of the warriors from the base to an event, because if the event costs too much money, they can't attend, they can't accept that as a gift.
Oh gosh.
And it can be as low as $25. So
Yeah,
no, you're not taking
I
any of
wouldn't
the...
work that. I wouldn't work that well with all of those rules.
Right.
You know, as we close, is there another question that you'd like to ask?
Oh no, I just have a funny story.
Okay.
So I invited Steve to come speak to the class when the girls were in lower school for career day, and he came in his outfit with his
Uniform. It's called a uniform.
His flight suit. He had a flight suit
Oh.
on, and he brought his helmet, and he gave the most unbelievable speech to these kids, and these kids were like, you know, he said, "Do you want to be part of the, you know, the greatest military in the world?" And these kids were so fired up, and he left, and the room was just electric, and these kids were so psyched. And then my husband went. He was next to speak at career day, and he delivers
GYNOB.
babies. And my husband was like, "Are you kidding me?" He was like, "How do I even follow that?" I mean, he was so intimidated
great.
and so humbled, and he was just like,
I
he's
love
in
it.
the flight suit, he's got his helmet on, these kids are fired up, they want to go to the military.
Joey didn't come in with sweats on,
No,
a little
he-
blood
no,
all over
he-
it.
no. So I just have to tell
Not
you,
as inspiring.
I will never forget that. And every year Steve comes to the school for Veterans Day and speaks and explains to the kids what the military is,
Fabulous.
what they do. And I just have to tell you, it just incredibly, I just am so impressed by you over all these years, and I'm honored to be called your friend. So thank you.
Thank you, same here.
Beautiful. And I've only met you since your transition has begun, and I've got to tell you, it has been really, you know, you have been following the pattern, and I've appreciated the integrity that you've taken with it at each challenge, at each good thing that occurs. You really know how to bunt and duck and get back up again. And you know, that's what you hope for people. I can never not have something not bad, you know, like I just don't know how to stop the bad stuff from happening. What I do know is that you know how to get up, and that's all that matters. And you clearly know how to do that. So I just can't imagine what it's going to be like as you change the conversation for not only our community but the entire nation on what it means to be a veteran and the impact they can have on our nation going forward. and I appreciate that you're devoting your life to that.
Well, thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you, everyone. It has been a real pleasure. And what I'd like to leave you with is this reminder. There is no guarantee that where you are is where you will be. So make sure that no matter where you are, every experience that you thought you didn't want to have becomes the experience that teaches you exactly where you can go next. Until next time, this is Andrea Goeglein, and I thank my guests and thank you all for being with us.
Andrea.
Thank you.